Welcome everyone. Sorry for the little delay, but some technical stuff to sort. So this is a session called Streets That Work for Everyone. And I think this is a very exciting and important. In terms of climate change, we know that cities are the #1 actors to take action. And I would say streets are probably our ground zero for action and our #1 public space and #1 space for moving. So when the title says that work for everyone, our presenters are going to talk about two aspects to work. That's the quality of the public space and the walkability. And I think that the for everyone is so important. We know that we have such diverse demographics, and we need to understand who experiences barriers, what those barriers are. And with aging demographics, we know that we are going to have more disability and more special needs, but we also have cities that are changing, welcoming people from abroad, more diversity. So I think this is a very important topic. Just a housekeeping aspect before we start. I would suggest that we keep the questions for the end, in terms of just so that we can make it to the end. I know it's not ideal, but nothing is. So our first presenter will be Renate Albrechter. Renate is a sociologist from APFL, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, from the Laboratory of Urban Sociology. And Renate's research revolves around pedestrians, public spaces, and gender. And Renate is going to talk about the bench as a station service for pedestrians. So Renate, the floor is yours.
Hello. My topic is public bench. So it's not the first object one thinks of when it's about pedestrians. But for pedestrians, they're not only mobile, they're also immobile, even more than any other of those moving things in our public space. And for me, the public bench is like a service station for pedestrians. I'd like to see it like this, corresponding what we have a service for cars, which everybody is aware of. There is a network of service stations. But it's not only a service station for pedestrians. But public benches are so interesting. Once you start with them, it's a philosophy, it's an emotion. You can read full society in public benches. It's really an object which increases the options of everybody. And what you have been yesterday in my talk about pedestrians, it's the number of options we have which make us happy. But if you have only one option, we feel not happy. So it's very important if you look for joy and freedom. It's this. And benches add a lot of options. So they contribute to the general well-being, the individual well-being, health topics, etc. I could speak hours of it. If I start, those who know me, I can stop. But what I want, the main message is there's a huge variety of needs on benches and expectations, which are far more than what we find on benches in our public spaces. And there are also a lot of obstacles for the use for benches. And what we did in several research projects, we tried to understand what they are, because there's not much research done. There's not much known about activities on benches and who uses what. To this enormous variety of criteria, we have on the other side that the bench users are not known, and they can really influence the choices made by the city. Who decides on the shape of the model, of the color, of whatever are the decisions, where they are. The users have no influence, more or less. Okay. So what we found out that the existing benches, and in bench, I mean here everything which allows to sit down. Public seating devices would be the better term to describe it. They do not really meet the user needs, only very special parts of the user needs. Especially we start already with the shape of the bench. Since 200 years, the shape of the bench, whenever you think of a bench, it's more or less the same thing. I can promise you it's something up like this. But does it do what we need when we sit down? So when you're one person, maybe it might fit that you feel well, really comfortable on the bench. But the moment you have two persons, you can see at least one of these persons is not really comfortable. He cannot use the back for sitting down, otherwise they couldn't speak. If you see three persons sitting on a bench, two sacrifice their comfort in order to be able to speak together. If you see four people on a bench, there is no communication anymore between the four possible. And if you have five people, they don't look very to enjoy themselves anymore. So the bench does not really support speaking together, although it is by definition something which should bring people together. It's the difference to a chair, where you're alone by definition. So apparently people don't want to be sitting like birds on their line in the same direction. I made hundreds of photos how people sit if they are not forced to sit on a traditional bench. You see them, they are confronting themselves, they have different angles, one to the other, depending on the relation, on what they're speaking, what do they attend from public space. Is it only the person? Is it also the surrounding which is integrated in their speaking? They look for this kind of angles or round things, or they make a circle. So that's how people sit down if they have the choice. You see this kind of shapes, but do you ever see this kind of shapes in benches? It's really, really rare. It's for some designed places when towns invest a lot of money, you find some new shapes. But the standard shape is one shape all over the city, or two, one for parks and one for streets. So we do this year's project, we try to understand decision-making in cities, how they decide on public benches. Another thing, which is also a huge difference between what is done and what people like, is the material of benches. So when we asked, interviewed a lot between 30 and 60 people about the preferred material. I noted every mention, so one person could have mentioned several different types of materials. So it's a qualitative study. So for all who work quantitative, please accept it's called qualitative work. But what is very clear is that users want wood. And they hate concrete and metal out in there. But what do we look? What we see when we look around, what is constructed nearly everywhere, it's metal and beton, also cement, concrete in English, benches. There is also a huge difference between what's offered and what users want. We also asked for the color. So for the material, we have to add, the people have a very strong opinion. Nobody don't mind what kind of material it is. And because it's the central quality, it's really all senses. You touch it, you feel it, it's cold, warm, it even smells or not smells. And the material is very, very central. We are so far away from reality and what users need. In color, we have less strong opinions. But if there is an opinion, it's more in the direction, give some color to the city. There's too much gray in the city. But very often, as it comes with concrete and metal, they are gray. When people have the decision to choose a bench, usually they don't have the decision. But I tried also to find out all criteria they mentioned during the interviews. And there's a bit more than one criteria. So we have, for example, the seat height. That's also a big topic I could speak long about. We have, especially in Switzerland, we have one norm, which is 10 centimeters of difference. But if you calculate the real height of person until their knees and the different interest of comfort, you should have much more in the difference in the height, for example. The armrests. What is the infrastructure close by? What do I see when I sit on the bench? It's very important. Not everybody wants to see the mountain there. Some people want to see people. Some people want to see people close by, the other want to see people far away and don't want to be seen themselves. It's very delicate, the question, especially men and women have here very different expectations. Sun shadow, the second hottest topic after the material. We look now, everybody shadow, but so many people say 10 months of the year I need sun because I don't have sun in my apartment. I don't see any sun where I work. I need sun. And the others who say, no, I need shadow even in winter. And the others say sun even in summer. So we have two contradictory needs. And this is not taken into account. How many benches are in the sun, how many in the shadow? Did you ever, I don't know who those who are responsible and decide on benches are few, but I don't know if you take this into account when you decide on benches. The location, it should be close to point of interest of daily life. Some need real point of interest, like going shopping, bringing just in front of the house, not need to go far away. So they have so many points of interest, a point of reference in the daily life, and they want benches there, not only to use it, but to meet people who are sitting there. Bag rests. What you didn't speak, yes. Also the individual feelings and knowledge of they're interested. This person I liked, she said, I like the bench to have a soul. I want it to open its arms for me. So it's not everything is measurable, but it's a very emotional thing, the bench, what people expect. I go fast for the obstacles because I think it will not succeed otherwise in 20 minutes, but the obstacles are very far. They can also concern other people around, obstacles to use it because they're missing, and also because it's unpleasant for the senses. You don't want to feel metal. The equipment of the bench, what can be around the bench, it's also huge what people they think of. It's the lighting, it's the noise level, it's what you smell. So all senses are concerned when you're on a bench, and people are not always aware that their decision or their well-being is influenced, but it can be very strong. All this, yeah. They are close to the bench, but then you smell them. They are really like 20 centimeters beside of you, so feel like you yourself are part of this. So it's something, yeah. We think sometimes it's forgotten. Or the atmosphere of a place, the glancing, gazing, that's something very important. Especially women are very sensitive if they are seen when they sit on the bench. They don't, if the bench is on a sidewalk too close, everybody who comes, you're in the line of view of every person who comes. So you're all the time in communication, even if the communication is tacit, but it might make you feel uncomfortable because everybody sees you, everybody judges you, everybody might speak to you or might just see you. So a lot of people, especially want to have a bench more back so that they can see, but they are not in the direct line of view of people passing. But it's very often forgotten that we need different. And other people want to be in the line of view because they need interaction. They are alone at home and they just want to meet people. It can be also temporarily. Today I'm like this. The other day I want to read a book. I don't want to be disturbed. The equipment and where the bench is positioned, it's very delicate. And rarely I see any criteria that the city is taking care of, that they have a variety of positions. So we have a huge complexity, a grand variety of needs, and it's very difficult to generalize. So what I said, the city who decides for two models for all over the city, it's like allowing only one type or two types of bikes in the city. Same height, same color for everybody, nobody else. And with the benches, we do it, and nobody complains. But everybody uses benches at some point. But it's somehow accepted that it's the signature of the city. Although it's very important for use and people have really different needs and expectations. So what can a city do, knowing there is a huge variety? So what we have several solutions. One of our solutions is a kind of including the citizens in the planning process, but maybe not in the traditional way, because the typical user of benches is not the one who goes to the meetings in the evening, speaks up before everybody. That excludes especially those who are really in need of benches, which we know are the most bench users. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is one app we developed for missing benches, improvement of the benching. Everybody can edit. So if somebody's interested to they can contact me. I can give you the test version. It's like this, very easy to introduce. And we know people really use it, especially those who have problems walking and who need benches. And yeah, this is some reports. We did a pilot project in Munich. You can follow me. And those who are really responsible for benches, I would be happy if you contact me, because we do this year a survey to better understand it. And I would be happy to give you the link. Thank you. Sorry for.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Renate. I find it fascinating, people's preferences and behaviors, and it makes me think that in engineering school we definitely don't learn about that. So that was great. And I would like to welcome Anne Doherty, who is the project manager for Living Streets. And Anne's interests are in participation, empowerment, and public health. And today Anne is going to talk, the presentation is called Beyond Tarmac, and Anne is going to talk about people's needs beyond tarmac. So Anne, welcome.
Thank you. Well, that was a brilliant presentation, Renata, and very relevant to what I'm about to say. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be at Walk21. It's an absolute privilege. I'm Anne Doherty from Living Streets. I think you all heard about Living Streets this morning. So we're the UK charity for everyday walking. I'm going to talk very briefly, and I'm going to rush through a lot of these slides because you've heard them all and we've talked about it for the last 2 days, which has just been great. So you don't need me to say it all again. But I do want to tell you what we've learned from actual real people in Scotland. This was just to say that what we all know, that walking isn't often included in the data, and unless you're in a shoe with wheels, your ordinary shoes don't get to count as traffic data. Also, just to give you a little context of Scotland, it's a highly car-dependent nation, but as we get older, especially older people living on their own, they're much less likely to have access to a car. But car ownership is very important to older people. They are terrified when they give up their car, they will not be able to get about and they lose their independence. So they are also very guilty of doing very short journeys in the car. So from terms of climate change, encouraging older people to give up the car, allowing and enabling people to give up the car before the health reasons force them to, or before they have an accident, is a really important aspect. Everyone walks, it's highly equitable, but yeah, it's not quite as simple as that, is it? Not everybody has the same access to everything. From a health point of view, Scotland doesn't do so well in terms of our health stats. We don't tend to live so long, and when we do live longer, we don't tend to live as healthily. Ironically, we know that walking is important for everybody, but as we get older, instead of telling people to sit down and have a rest, we should be telling them to get up, move about. Because as we get older, walking and staying active movement becomes even more important. The guidance is nuanced. We don't all have to run or take part in triathlons or be super fit or enter the Tour de France or walk the 500 miles in Scotland. But we do need to be active daily. We do need to break up our day with movement. We should all actually, in fact, you should all, could everybody just stand up? Just stand up. There we go. Just stamp your feet. Lift your hands. Put your hands down. Sit down. We should all be active throughout our day. We should break up our periods of sitting and our periods of sedentary time. But we're good at ignoring medical advice, and that doesn't change as we get older. So very low physical activity leads to isolation and serious health issues amongst older people. This is just a nice slide that says what I've just said, and that's the evidence that proves it. What is good walking infrastructure? Well, we know all this as well. It's feeling safe. It's having priority as pedestrians. It's being accessible. It's avoiding severance when we're putting big motorways through our communities and towns. It's space that's nice and comfortable. I'm going to miss out number 6 because we're coming back to that. It's, again, feeling safe because of lighting and natural. We had a discussion a little bit yesterday about shortcuts and who's in charge of the shortcuts and having that connectivity in neighbourhoods. And one of the things for shortcuts is having it overlooked. When places are overlooked and people can see them, people feel safer because there's natural surveillance. Not having trip hazards and obstacles. Somewhere that's interesting, that's direct in where we want to go, and it's clean and well maintained. For the people in Ireland who were saying they've got all the active travel money and they couldn't spend it all, give it all to your maintenance team and get them to clean the streets. That's the single biggest thing you can do quickly that doesn't involve design and infrastructure. But resting places, and this is where we come to benches. And Do you know, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to speak to you about this, Renata, because we just want a bench. We don't care what colour it is. We don't care what it's made of. We don't care about anything. We're just begging for a bench. You can see how important a bench is. This street, it's just a street. It's not a park, just a street. Can we have a bench, please? Oh my goodness, 2 years. 2 years. It means a lot. So what did we do? We set up the out and about groups. People power. Working with people to identify their barriers, setting up small groups, understanding the local issues, identifying priorities, and then putting the priorities with things that we could actually change and influence. Wider consultation, bringing in partners for the longer term stuff, and empowering our communities. Some of the issues are Cumbernauld Group. Cumbernauld is a small town in Scotland. And again, we had another bench. You'll notice they are all very boring, dull benches. They are made of recycled plastic because we can assure the local authorities they are maintenance free. So they are really cheap and they will put them in. That's our bench. We love that bench. I would love it to be a lovely colour. I would love it. It's at least plastic and not metal. It is more pleasant than the metal ones, but it's not ideal. But hey, it's what we could do. And I'm going to show a clip. We did a video. If you'd like to see more, go to the Living Streets website and we've got a 5-minute video about how hard it was to get a bench. And this is a local councillor in a local authority area in Scotland. And then through that, you also see one of the community councillors who was one of our group members in the Out and About group. And I'll just play that if it plays. Hopefully it will. We just press. Oh. How do I get that to play? That one?
It's not a video.
Oops, it's not come up as a video. It doesn't matter if it hasn't.
No,
we can just skip
it's
that.
a video.
Oh, in my computer, it's a video. When is a video not a video? When it's a picture. So, Councillor Claire Ramage was just going to say that what we found was we said, hey, we'd like to put in a bench. So she went to her local authority and said, hey, how do we get a bench? And they said, oh, yes, we go to the website and you put in for a bench. Went to the website, but it was for memorial benches, only memorial benches, which is lovely and a very lovely thing to do. I'm all for promoting people to do that. But that was assumed to be wanted in a park. We don't want it in a park. We want it on, like the street we showed you, and getting people so that they have those resting points and they can meet. So we spent a long time, admittedly, partly because of COVID, that did slow everything down. So I'm hoping it won't generally take 2 years to get a bench, but it did take us 2 years. And the scale of the challenge can be quite overwhelming. And by working with communities and bringing, get too excited there, bringing the communities together with the planners, with the people, it really does make a difference, helping the planners and the decision makers understand just the impact of not having somewhere to rest. People who can't get out, you know, very often we hear about drivers and they will tell you that the state of the car because of potholes. And they'll say it's really bad for my car and they get quite cross. I have not once heard a car driver say, well, of course, I didn't go out today because the road was impassable, unless it's extreme snow or something we're all stuck at home. Very rarely do you get a pothole unless there's been a landslide or some really major thing that regularly stops people getting there. The number of older people say, well, of course, I don't go out on a Tuesday because that's bin day. I can't go to those shops ever because the pavement runs out. I just stay at home. The impact, but stay active, be active. Remember that? We want you to be connected, socially connected. Oh, but no, you can go to a Zumba class. Well, I can't get to my local shops. This is how important it is. So we believe that by working with communities and planners and bringing them together, we can learn from each other and we can scale up. And hopefully we can speed up the rate of change, because the reality is that we've heard so many positive things in the last couple of days, and it's great, and I am really feeling positive. But if we go at this rate of change, I'll be lucky if my unborn grandchildren get the benefit. 3 of my project participants have died before getting a bench. Is that unacceptable? This is a great thing. I'm so proud of the work we've done. We've been empowering local groups. But the fact that we have to empower communities to ask for a bench. Surely there is something wrong with that. So we need better walking environments for everyone, but older people need those better walking environments now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it was you more than on time. Thank you.
The video, I captured in the time. So.
We'll have more time for questions, and thank you for talking about the how and really the benches basic need and the needs of older people, which are it's such an important topic. So next, our next presenter is Alexandra Gomez, who is joining us from London online. And Alexandra is a research fellow at LSE Cities and has an interest in different dimensions of urbanizations and how they connect to public health, participation, and equity. And Alexandra is doing her PhD on senses and how senses, and the presentation today will be linked to her PhD research. And her presentation today will be about how senses relate to the decisions, linking a little bit with what Renate said. So welcome, Alexandra.
Hi. Can you hear me? I guess so. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. Sorry. Here it is. Yeah, I hope you can all see. So the urban environment is a multisensory composition of visual, sound, and smell and haptic characteristics. And some might add the taste. However, planners and designers ignore and forget the non-visual senses. So I brought this gray image that represents the need to raise the awareness for the non-visual and to ultimately make the non-visual senses more visible. So I'm presenting on sensing spaces and how the senses influence the choices we make when we walk. When we walk, the non-visual senses are part of the streetscape and they influence our behavior, even if we don't see them. However, sensory perception and consequent emotions have hardly played a role in the debate about the future of cities. This often is linked to a kind of a battle against the senses. And that starts with an historical campaign against the non-visual and then incomplete policies. And finally, with the dominance of the visual. So there's a new concept that brings the aim to explore the invisible city. So the non-visual senses were always kind of an historical underdog. We had with Aristotle the hierarchy of the senses where the visual was superior and a primary sense against other non-visual senses. And then also the senses were seen, the non-visual senses were seen by the function they could play, in particular in medieval and later Western history and literature about the nighttime role. So we needed the other senses when we didn't have the sight or the light to orientate ourselves, to navigate and to see the wayposts. Later on in the mid-19th century, there was social hierarchies are linked to the pure and against the impure sensations. Purity and dirt are linked to fear and spatial order. And there are lots of new smaller regulations linked to the improvement of public space and the regulation of the non-visual senses and combating the non-visual senses. And planning and urban design have been mostly focused on the negative of the senses. And you have, for example, a lot of studies about the London smog and pollution and smell, noise of the city. And that's what basically the design and planning have been focusing on, the negative. But where is the positive? Where can we see how the positive of the senses influence the way we live and the way we move in the city? Consequently, and due to limitations of time and costs, planning and designing focus on the evaluation of the senses, mostly in a quantitative way, and forget the positive, and forget to create mechanisms of pleasuring in the city. So they focus on physical measures, and they forget the subjectivity of human experience and in control mechanisms. And that creates kind of a circularity of the incomplete policies in planning and design. So there's a new concept arising of the sensescape, and that's the concept I pick up on my PhD to explore and make the non-visual senses more visible. This concept incorporates the full range of the sensory experience and deals with a range of disciplines, and it links to the sensual experience mediated through smell, hearing, touch, and taste, as well as the sight. It links to the mind, the body, and the environment. It fluctuates in intensity and in power, and conveys the fluid perceptions of panorama. This is just an example of how people can move in the streets and perceive different sensory perceptions through the sound, smell, and touch. And the aim of this research is to look into the multisensory and how that links to how we move and we choose our locations. So some of the questions are: how do people perceive the sensescapes? What are the key elements? And what's the framework of analysis of these sensescapes? And how does the urban real mediate the way we move in space? So you have the urban real, the elements that mediate it, the personal sensory experience, and then use of space. The more pleasant it is, the more people will use it, and that will obviously react in the quality of the urban realm, etc., etc. So there's the circularity here again. So the aim is to create a multisensory analysis of space, explore the links between human and environment, and create a framework of analysis. I basically use semi-structured street interviews, direct engagement with urban space, and talk to people, and then content analysis of the interviews, annotation, observation, and photography. So this is my case study area. It's in Bishopsgate in East London. It's a 20-minute walk route, and it was selected by the mix of uses and different densities and characteristics that link to different sensory perceptions. So I've basically asked people, what sounds or smells do you experience here? How do you feel in this area? And from the content analysis of the interview, I created patterns that I saw emerging from this analysis, and I tried to understand how people perceive these sensescapes and what are the key elements that policymakers and practitioners should look at. The next slides are going to illustrate some examples from these interviews. So, for example, in this slide, from the discourse of the interviewee, the participant, emerges the relation between smell and memory, a case where the smell was absent, but the visual of the alleyway brings this idea of a place where, you know, the national public sport, as it was described, to pee is practice. And my participant said, I'm not going to go through there. I don't want to go through there. And I prefer an alternative route. And then, for example, this other slide, it's a space where there's a market. And you can hear people, wider categories of people talking and walking and bargaining. These also express different intensities of the same elements. And although the market is aimed to attract people, it can also lead people to look for an alternative route. And I had people who would say, this is too much. This is overwhelming. I can't go through this place. In this location in Bishopsgate, the intensity and the dominance of the elements become so clear, and it leads to specific individual reactions. Strong elements as traffic and building works are highlighted in this discourse of the participants in this case. And there is expressions of distance when they say it's too close to me, it's too close. And this is a fundamental route that connects to the train and the tube station, but it's one route that most of my participants said they wanted to avoid. On the other side, in this square, for example, we can see how sounds, and positive sounds in this case described as a fairly pleasant music, can attract people. And nowadays, sounds as smells are used by shops and particular places to do that, to attract people to enter, to come in. This often happens with smells and, for example, popcorn odors in cinemas or oven bread smells in supermarkets. So that's something that was highlighted also in my research. In another case, for example, as this seems to be more in terms of sounds, the use of onomatopoeia to mimic the element perceived. A lot of the times, people can't really either they can't really describe the element, or they have to use an onomatopoeia to make us understand how strong or how boring or how continuous a particular sound is. And in this case, more than the content of the planes, brings that continuity and that overwhelming constant sound in the area. This is an example of a doubt and difficulty when people try to describe something. And that seems to, again, happen with smell more than with sound or vision. And this example shows that there are cases of doubt in describing a particular element. But nevertheless, people tend to use other elements or words that they relate to what they are perceiving. And that's also quite interesting to look into. Finally, this last slide shows an example of the important relation between urban morphology and the link between land use and seasonal activities. And this highlights the difference between weekdays and weekends, because a lot of these shops are open, but during the weekends and weekdays, but some of the offices are only open during the week. And you have different sounds and different activities depending on when you visit this area. Narrow and active spaces also tend to attract people to walk by, especially if these are pedestrianized or if they are narrow enough not to have car traffic. So finally, this is a bit of my framework of analysis. I kind of try to structure it with different dimensions that planners and urban designers could use to explore public space with their senses. So questions as what are the elements, what is the element, and how does the element qualify? Is it negative? Is it positive? How is it mediated? Is it the element source, or is there barriers, or are there elements that enhance these element sources? How does the space and the different dimensions work together into influencing how we perceive? And then also the individual experience. What is the meaning? What is it? Particular experiences, and as one of our previous speakers mentioned, for example, the material of the benches, they create a behavior. And a lot of my interviewees, they sat on a bench that was stone and it was too cold, and they were like, I'm not staying here. So there is a behavior that it's linked to particular sensory experiences. So why is this useful in street design? And just to finish, because it is important to understand the role of the built environment, mediating these senses, because it's important to define the sensescapes, because they affect the way we live and we move around the city, because it's important to create a methodology that includes all dimensions of the sensescapes adapted to different spaces and time, and the framework of analysis has to be open to that adaptation, because it's important to have a better control of urban planning and design in terms of how they link to the senses and influence policy and design codes. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to, through the exploration of alternative methods, raise awareness and make sound and other non-visual senses more visible. Only then we can aim at creating better urban spaces and places to walk by. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I found it fascinating to examine this connection between people and their behavior and their environment using different senses, and I like how you said who spoke of the hierarchy and interviewing people. I can see that the senses non-visual can be really important, especially for those with who are blind or with sight loss, but also for everyone. And this is a good segue to our next speaker, who is Pablo Carreras, because Pablo is going to talk about how traffic-free streets are transforming French cities, and it's a way of calming the environment. So Pablo is an economist and urban planner and sustainable mobility consultant in France. So welcome, Pablo.
Thank you, Amar. Yes. This is one. Thank you. So, as it was said in the introduction, I will be presenting the project of the previous one. Yes, this is. Okay, thank you. So yes, the projects of the transformation of public spaces in French city centers. So I will. In the introduction, I can say that in the last years, several French cities have started to transform the city centers and to pedestrianize the central streets. And this is a movement that started before the COVID. The COVID has accelerated this movement, but it's not the origin of this new redesign of public space in French cities. It has more like an acceleration process, but this is not the first reason of this kind of project. And some of these projects have undergone like an experimental phase that I call open streets, and that this is what I'm going to present today. So I will present 4 case studies in different French cities. Paris, Paris Respire, it means Paris is breathing. So this shows what is the aim of this type of projects, like to combat pollution, especially. Senlis in the north of France, a little city, medieval city. Lille in the north of France too, and Nancy in the east of France. So this is a map of Paris. You can recognize the form of Paris. You can see in purple all the areas that are pedestrianized once a week. So every Sunday, all the areas that are in purple are pedestrianized. In yellow, you can see all the areas that are pedestrianized once a month. Every one Sunday a month, the first Sunday of each month. So if you can describe a little bit this project that is taking place in Paris, it started in 2016, so before COVID, and the goal is to pedestrianize during one day a week some areas in the city center. As you can see, it's areas that were already used almost exclusively by pedestrians. So this project, in my opinion, it hasn't transformed the use of the space. It has more like confirmed the use that was already there. It was places that were already almost used exclusively by pedestrians, and some cars from time to time, but it was especially used by pedestrians. It is not an experiment, because it has been decided to pedestrianize these areas that are shown in the map once a week, and sometimes once a month. But it's not an experiment. It's like a political decision to make this type of project. So I have some pictures. This is in the center of Paris, the neighborhood that's called Le Marais. So as you can see, it's difficult to imagine a car in this type of context. Before the pedestrianization, it was like a shared street. but there was a very small number of cars. So that is the same in Canal Saint-Martin in Paris. So the pedestrianization has come to make official a situation that was already in the city center. It hasn't completely transformed the use of the city center. So if we look at the results of this project in Paris, we can see this is it's not an evaluation of the pedestrianization process because there hasn't been any evaluation, but we can see some figures of the evolution of mobility in Paris. So this is a pedestrian intensity map. This map shows that the areas that before the pedestrianization were the most intensely used by pedestrians were the area that were pedestrianized. So there's no surprise in the process in the project. The evolution of the number of cars in Paris of traffic has strongly decreased, and the share of pedestrian activity pedestrian mode has strongly increased. But I think it's we cannot say that this is directly linked to the pedestrianization. Pedestrianization, in my opinion, is more like a part of a global process of a social tendency trend to move more by foot. The second example is Nancy, in the east of France. So Nancy has decided to implement a pedestrianization of one of the main commercial streets. And the difference with Paris is that this project has been subject to an experiment. The experiment was in the summers, in 2021 and 2022, so it just finished, during the evenings and on weekends. So it has been completely evaluated with surveys and observation, etc. So we can know what is the result of this project, and the result has been integrated in the implementation of the definitive pedestrianization. Because the difference between this project and Paris is that the goal of this project was to experiment to then definitively pedestrianize, close the area to cars. So the definitive pedestrianization has been implemented that week. So I have some example. You can see the borders because some people can still access, but this has not been completely redesigned, not yet. They just closed, but there's no redesign. So some shops, some restaurants has installed the terraces and the cafes. If you look at the results of the project, I think one interesting figure is the fact that the number of pedestrians has decreased during the pedestrianization, and I think this is interesting because we can see that pedestrianization is just one of the factors to take into account, because it was just after the COVID, just after the lockdown. So I think the decrease the number of pedestrians during this experiment is more linked to the COVID than to the pedestrianization. So I think this is a very interesting lesson because we cannot always say that the result is linked to the project. There's a multitude of factors that to take into account. So if we look at another result of the project, how people move, I will be fast in this slide. Most people come from the city of Nancy, and most people come by walking. I think we don't see the figures, but I think it's 39% who come by walking. And this is interesting if we compare to the vision of shop owners, retailers. They say that 77% come by car. So that is the opinion from retailers versus the reality of how people move. So we can see why the majority of shop owners are against this project, and this is the main problem, the main political problem. The last result from Nancy is compare the behavior, the consumption behavior. So I will be fast in this description because we can say that pedestrians spend less on average, but they come more often and they visit more shops. So in the larger picture, they spend more. So this is an interesting result because we did have this result in other cities, and this confirms this result from research from other countries. The third example is Lille. Lille is more like Paris. They have decided to definitively close the city center once a week. So this is on Saturdays. This was decided in 2021 during the COVID pandemic with no consultation. The city just decided to do it. They did it, and there was some opposition, but from shop owners and especially from neighbor cities. But right now, nobody would imagine to come back to the old situation. And this is like Paris because the city center was already used almost exclusively by pedestrians, especially on weekends. There were no cars at all. So this project came to confirm the situation that was already existing. So right now, the only difference is that before, pedestrians used to walk only on the sidewalk. And right now, they have taken the full position, occupation of the whole street. Some examples. And the result, this project has not been evaluated, but what we can say about this project is that it has certainly helped to reduce the traffic, but we don't know if this is the only factor. There is like in Paris, there is a large number of factors that have contributed to this. For example, the circulation plan, the COVID, etc., etc. So we don't know. There's no evaluation of this project. The last example is Senlis. So this is a small city center street that has been pedestrianized in an experimental way. The idea was to then implement a definitive project like in Nancy, but due to the opposition of shop owners, this has been suspended. So right now they are trying to work with retailers, but the project is suspended because they're waiting to find a solution with them. This is some examples. And this is I think we can just show one figure maybe, is the fact that 81% of people, or inhabitants, people who use this space are agree with the project, but only 39% of shop owners, 39%. And the opposition is so strong that the political persons from this city has decided to suspend the project to find an agreement with them. So this is different from Nancy. It's the same goal that Nancy, but a different result. I think to conclude, what we could say is that pedestrianization, in my opinion, is like a more general trend in France. And in my opinion, it doesn't come from COVID. COVID has accelerated things, but it hasn't changed the political decision to pedestrianize the area. These two types of projects, Paris and Lille, that I've shown, it's more like a definitive decision to pedestrianize 1 or 2 days a week. And there is also the experimental project, like Nancy, like a successful project, and Senlis is more difficult because of the opposition. Well, shop owners are against. I already said that. A comprehensive evaluation of the project is very important, not only before and during, but also afterwards. And in my opinion, especially in the Nancy case, this evaluation has helped to gain political support. This is the main lesson from this evaluation, is that it has helped politicians to present their project and to find acceptance in the population and shop owners. And maybe the last conclusion is to say that this is not an isolated measure. It has to be implemented in a mobility plan, in a circulation plan, to improve access to the city center, not only from the city itself, but especially from other cities. And I think maybe the key aspect is public transport. The fact that people will have an alternative way to access to the city center, because if not, we will have opposition from people who live in other cities than the city that is being present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pablo. I thought that was fascinating, and I noticed it really illustrates the power of, I think, 3 things: political courage, and these reversible measures that allow people to experience something else. And the third, I would say, the modest bollard, which just keep the traffic away. So thank you. That's great. And our last presenter is Francisco Uribe, who is assistant professor in Calgary. Francisco is architect and urban designer, and interested in how the form influences people's behaviors. And Francisco is going to talk about the winter city and the measures for all ages and mobilities. Thank you, Francisco.
Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of this session. It's great to see so much overlap with the previous presenters and the topics that we're dealing with, and as well as see that a great turnout physically and hopefully virtually as well. And I start with this slide because I come from Mexico, not a winter city at all, Monterrey in Mexico, but now I live in Canada and I work at the university there. And as a winter city, we do have significant impacts and ways that we need to adapt in terms of how we talk about walkability. And essentially what I tried to present today is a connection between the large-scale policies and how they actually impact at the micro scale of the pedestrian. And this little diagram on the right is a way for me to explain to students and to myself as well how those things relate and how do we have to analyze, plan for, and execute at these different levels of scale. So at the very bottom is the idea of making the big decisions of how we develop on the land, and all of that through land subdivision, what do we build on that, land use, impacts really our public life and experience of the city. So specifically in the case of Calgary, Calgary has lots of resources, and one of it is land, which is also a negative thing for us because we don't have a lot of natural boundaries, and the city has expanded at a low density for many decades, from essentially almost from the beginning. And what you can see here in the orange is that we're still proposing and we're still carrying on those larger policies that impact this low density. We doesn't come through here very great, let's say, the tones of red, but essentially if you think about Calgary's density is about 2.5 less that of Dublin. So we're really struggling to have a compact city. So what happens when we look at what that is the impact on the kind of neighborhoods we have is that we have divided the neighborhoods mainly in 3 different kinds in our city, and I'll go through them. This tend to be from the older neighborhoods towards the out of the city, the newer neighborhoods. In the older neighborhoods, we saw that there is this grid pattern, block pattern that is very walkable, lots of choices, and as well as, let's say, the micro scale, we have separated sidewalks in many cases, and we have space for street trees. As we go into the 1930s, 50s, 60s, with the introduction of the automobile as this big component, then we see this change on the block pattern, as you can see, and as well we have the monowalk, which is I hate, and I will explain why I hate it so much. But we have sidewalks on both sides of the street, and they're called monowalks because they're exactly next to the curb, and that creates problems for us in Canada. And then some of the newer neighborhoods only have one sidewalk on one side of the street on this curvilinear, and we start to lose more. We're talking about having a bench. Well, having a sidewalk would be also nice. So it really started to decrease the quality of the public realm. And we saw this as one of our research projects, is how we evaluated the quality of the public environment, the pedestrian environment. As you can see, the darker color here on the right is what shows higher quality, and it starts to decrease as we go into these newer neighborhoods. And talking about policy, this diagram is from the city of Calgary, and it just shows you how the complexity of policy, it also brings these silos, and it hasn't broken those silos. So the Department of Planning here in the red circles, it's the responsibility, it drops as it starts to get close to the street, right? But maybe we can agree or disagree on those things, but what this diagram shows is this disconnect of what is the reality of how we build the public realm and how we plan for it, with all the separation of entities and departments. Some of these images are of the new suburbs being built, and while they are trying to build with higher density, that hasn't really transferred into higher densities. It's marginal what is the difference with the new suburbs being built. And the consequences of that, of those policies, while they introduce, these are guidelines from the city, they're introducing still this idea from the past. So in this case, the lane, at the back of the houses, or the garages to be at the back, and we have separated sidewalks and street trees. But they also provide the opportunity for the monowalk. So we have still that opportunity, great, still with lane, and we still have the sidewalks on both sides, but now next to the curb. And they also provide the opportunity of not having the lane. So now what happens is we have driveways on the front of the street and start to limit the amount of space we have for street trees, but also the conflict between vehicles and the pedestrian. What is more interesting is that policy that has been applied. Yes, it looks like good on paper, but in practice, if you see this aerial photograph of one of the newer suburbs, and you see that there is a back lane, but they continue to have this front garage that limits that. So the benefits of the back lane that could bring more sidewalk space and street trees are not being utilized because gaps on policy. This is just a picture of how much snow we can actually get. That's in front of my house, lots of snow shoveling. But this is one of the older neighborhoods, so I do have the separated space from the street, where you see a lot of the snow is accumulated in that space. It can be accommodated. Now, micro scale. So those conflicts between the driveways and the sidewalk have this little slope, very convenient for the car, right? But what happens in Calgary is that we have huge fluctuations of temperature just within one day. It could be around 10 to maybe even 12 or 15 degrees. So that brings that at the end of the day and for the next morning, this water that was melting and drying down, it converts into ice by the sidewalk. So in the next morning, we have icy sidewalks, and they are very problematic. It's easy to clear snow, not so much to clear ice from the sidewalks. The other thing here with the red arrow is this idea of a curb, which is to protect the vehicles, the tires, to hitting this curb. But it's really bad for the pedestrian, especially for those that have mobility and visual perceptions problems, right? A curb edge is not as easy to identify as a clear cut edge, which I don't see a lot of this problem in Europe, but it is very common in North America. So little decisions that make mobility quite a problem. And it is codified. This is part of one of those engineering sheets that you need to apply for. So there you can see that little curve that is in the drawing. And like I said, just took a photograph recently. This is in Germany, but it's observed here as well in other parts of Europe, where it's very clear cut, beautiful. I don't know how you get so much granite for your curves in Europe, but that's amazing. But this very clear curve, and it's easy to navigate. These are photographs of some of the excursions that I do with my students to understand some of our partners. We partner with a lot of community associations, and we experience this firsthand, right? So we have to go and walk with them, with the students and the community. We do joint walks with them to understand the site. And this is where you can see these conflicts, especially in the winter, when there is the snow, there is ice being built, very narrow sidewalks. So all of that is that kind of difficulty here. You can see that interface between a driveway and the sidewalk. And we need to have more space for that. This is another example. There's a diversity of sidewalks here. Here is a neighborhood that is more from the 1940s. So you see that the curve is 90 degrees. So that's clear. In some cases, it's close to the street, and in some cases separate. If the question probably somebody has, why did we go like this? Well, it's cheaper to build than a separate sidewalk. That's one of the reasons why the monowalk make an appearance. This is Montreal, and you can see here one of the older neighborhoods. I like this photograph just because the tree, they preserve an older tree, so they went around it, right? So it's more about these micro decisions that can really make a big difference. But we need the space. Montreal even gets more snow than we do, but we need the space to be able to accommodate the pedestrian and the snow and keep it clear for people to move. So trees are very important for that particular micro scale comfort. In this photograph, you remember those two maps, the quality of the pedestrian environment in red being the higher quality, and it has a relationship. This is a map from the city of Calgary. They map their street trees. It has a relationship of that higher quality with a higher density of street trees. right? So blue areas, the darker blue is higher density of street trees versus what we observe in other types of neighborhoods. So what are some of the recommendations? I mean, we do have this climate emergency. I would say that we have also a pedestrian urgency for this sort of changes. So we did observe that it was clear during COVID that we did not have enough space. This is one of the measures that happened in Calgary quite quickly, which I might say. It showed the opportunity for us to change this policy quickly, to create more pedestrian and patio space, because we could not go inside restaurants, so they needed more patios to meet outside. So all of a sudden, let's take away some of, in this case, the vehicle area. That's where pedestrian can walk, and the sidewalk was taken more tables, so that the businesses could stay in business and people could actually meet outside. So the possibility of reclaiming space is there. We just need maybe more of the will to do that. And basically, I would say let's focus on the little things, right? We talked about sidewalks before, but I think we do have space for street trees and space for sidewalks is at the very minimum what we need. And take into consideration winter season. In this case, the sidewalks are not even wide enough, right? You can see people walking on the snow, and that often happens when you are facing someone coming on the other direction. Somebody has to step on the snow, which is also problematic. And we talk about the elderly. Over the winter, many of them end up not going into the public realm because it's such a uninviting environment, very dangerous. We know that falls are a huge component of the decline of quality of life of a senior. So you really want to avoid that, right? So we have that as a big piece. And going back to the policies, I mean, if we are going to densify the suburbs, we really need to make that effort strongly, right? This is another photo of or a screen capture of policy of the city. And it's talking about commercial, which is interesting. So in commercial, they're saying, oh, let's minimize the number of vehicle entries that we have along the street. But they don't talk about that same case scenario in the residential, right? If you have, in the smaller drawings here, if you have more of the multifamily, higher density building type, you're going to limit the amount of that pedestrian vehicle entries as well. So little decisions like that could definitely impact and improve the pedestrian environment and prevent for having these constant conflicts between cars and vehicles. So we have a long way to go in Calgary in terms of changing our city and these larger areas of our city that are very low density, and we cannot easily reconfigure those. But at least we can focus on some areas of the city where we can reclaim some of that pedestrian space. And it's another one of the classes where we were working with the community and being able to gather here a few people in a wider sidewalk with trees and clear of snow. That's what we should be aiming for in some of our areas. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco. I really like climate emergency and pedestrian urgency, and this way of assessing both the urban form and the weather and how they interact with the pedestrian experience. So thank you so much. It has been 5 amazing presentations, and we have, how much time do we have? We have some 15 minutes for questions. So I would open the floor to the questions, and I will also check what we received online. So does anyone have a question to start with?
I have a question here. Oh, sorry, sir. There's a question back.
Okay. Actually, hi, Dave McConnell from Dublin. Actually, I just want to thank our comment and exhortation about investment because I think it's incredibly important and it's something that I've been thinking about and want to take back. And I just wonder if she has any examples around sort of maintenance around where that's sort of been invested well, possibly.
Yeah. So have you heard?
That was for Alan Doherty.
For Anne. Sadly, I have very few examples of where it's been done well. I have a plethora of examples where it hasn't been done.
Sure.
And when we've gone out, our methodology, when we've gone out and created our out and about groups, as we call them, which is all about empowering the community. And we start off by saying, what are your barriers to walking? And maintenance, cleanliness of the area is always there, every single time. And I mean, so are many other things, but that's always there. And you know, when we do anything that involves change with maintenance, and it's made more complex for a lot of groups depending on land ownership, it becomes so complex. If it's one thing, if it's an area that is jurisdiction of the local authority, but we've been looking a lot at the 2020 neighbourhoods. And the idea of what could you get to walk locally, and you know, people are taking this and looking at all the planning frameworks, and the community think just have somewhere that was nice to walk. It's not full of rubbish, and a lot of that is just because the local authority doesn't have enough funding for maintenance. But the other aspect of that is that it's in the jurisdiction of private landowners, and there's derelict land or derelict buildings, and that's a really big issue as well. So that wasn't very helpful.
Thanks, out of lovely stuff. Like I said, Alice's amazing talk yesterday about safety.
Yes, it was amazing, and I resonated so much with my experience.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Audrey from the Institute of Transport Economics. Really great presentations. Really fits together in an interesting way. And my question was for Pablo regarding the studies from France, which is very interesting, and it really aligns with the findings we have from Oslo. But I was wondering, why do they restrict this pedestrianization to single days? And then also, have they have you looked at how this pedestrianization affects deliveries?
Yes. So regarding the first part of the question, why single days? It's because it's the most easy day. That's I think this is the main answer, because indeed, like I show, especially in Paris and in Lille, this is the day that was already unofficially already pedestrian, because there was nobody would go to this zone by car. You have to be crazy to go there by car because it's impossible to access, impossible to park. There's no parking space. There was before the pedestrianization, there was a number of pedestrians that were so huge that you can even go circulate with your car. It's impossible. So I think this is especially true in weekends, because there's a lot of tourists, of people, of the cafes, etc. People who go just to, how do you say, to take profit of public space and to take a walk. But this is not the same on weekdays. Weekdays is concentrated in peak hours. People go to the metro, etc. But outside peak hours, it's more like a calm space. So I think it's more like a process. They have started by the easy space because it's central space, and easy moment because it's the moment that was already almost already pedestrian, and especially in Paris and in Lille. I don't know if you've seen, it's like a shared space. So it worked already like a shared space with some cars from time to time. And in deliveries, your question about deliveries, generally they have 2 or 3 hours in the morning where deliveries they can access to the zone. They have a special permit, especially in Nancy, because you have the bollard system. They have a permission, and they have they read the plate, the identification of the car, So they can act. The boiler goes down and they enter, and yeah, I think it's between 8 and 10 in the morning. It's a special period, and they can access, and this doesn't produce any problem to the work of the area. But I think it's like more like evolution process. In the next years, I think we will see more periods and more zones that will be pedestrianized. But in France, we don't have a lot of experiments. Nancy is a very interesting experience, but most projects are more like a definitive, temporary pedestrianization.
Thank you. We had another question there, and then.
Clara from Cycling and Age, Pablo. He said it was decided and there was no consultation. How do you achieve that? We have so much party politicking here that one side will decide one thing and then everybody else will say,
I think, especially in the Lille context, is thanks to COVID-19. Because in the Lille example, they have decided to pedestrianize, and the whole process was done in 10 days. From the decision to the pedestrianization, everything was done. They decided, they make a press conference, and 2 weeks after, everything was already in place. But the borders, they took a little more time. But at the first, they have 2 volunteers in each gate in the entry gate to the city center. They were controlling who comes in and who comes out. And in 10 days, they implemented the project. It's I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but it's thanks to COVID they could do that. In Paris, they did a consultation, but more in a voluntary way and at a neighborhood level. There was not a consultation at the city level. It was more like a local level when there was a shop owner that was not happy, etc. But there was not a generalized consultation. And I think this is, and there's not a lot of opposition in Lille or in Paris, but I think this is because the area already worked very well without cars. I think the opposition will start when they start to expand the zone in other cities, part of the city. For example, Paris, there was a project to pedestrianize the whole city center of Paris, and they have suspended the project because some authorities don't agree.
Thank you. So there was a question.
I also have a question. I'm Vela from the city of Ghent. What about cyclists? Are they allowed?
I didn't have time to talk about cyclists, but this is a very difficult point because there is 2 opposing needs. The need in Paris, Lille, and all the big cities. They have the cycling plan, and they have cycling routes. And the cycling routes, the priority is to go fast from one point to another with bike. However, some of these bike cycling routes, they go through pedestrian zones. And for now, we didn't have the solution. I think one solution would be to have alternative routes that don't go to the pedestrian zone, because in the pedestrian zone, cycling should not go 20 kilometers per hour by bike. He should go down off the bike and walk. So it's right now they are allowed to enter the zone, but they have to keep the pedestrian space. They cannot go very fast. But this is a conflict, and we don't have right now we don't have the solution. But I think there is 2 contradictory processes. In the COVID, we have from one side we have the pedestrianization, and at the same time we have done the temporary cycling routes, but they go in the same zone. So it's every city has the same problem. We have a conflict, and we right now we don't have the solution.
This is a great point, and we know that for certain demographics, especially for blind people, it's such an issue to share the space with bikes. And I also heard from parents with small children that they would really like to be able to tell the children that here you can walk, and in a shared space where bikes can just run anywhere. It is a bit. So thank you so much. So there's a question.
Yeah, it's Francesco. Just I like the policy you had there of instituting laneways and people having to access their houses via back to the laneway and park in. In those estates, do you have a policy of ensuring there's no parking at the front of those houses? That would be very important because here we do have laneways, people park in the back. The fronts are usually full of cars, also they're parking on footpaths and everything else. And it defeats the purpose then. So, like, I was just wondering what you had a policy on.
Yeah, in the neighborhoods where there is a back lane and there are back garages turn into storages, workshops, secondary living spaces. And so we have that problem. And then what happens is when you want to reclaim the street, there is opposition from those owners. So I think, again, in that case, it requires like public engagement, participation, some education, and then we can reclaim that. But yeah, it is problematic.
Thank you. Have other questions? Oh yes. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought, not related to my PhD, but related to some other work that I did. I thought that I wanted to ask Francisco about Calgary, because I've been doing research in Kuwait, which is the other extreme. It's very hot, but it's exactly the same. So when you said we've talked about benches, but having a sidewalk, it would be great. I think the same is happening in the Middle East in many of the cities, and in particular in Kuwait. And I was wondering if you have the same challenge that they have there about public space. So there, what happens is that also the low densities and the size of the houses kind of attract people to socialize indoors, and the extreme temperatures help. So the public space ends up being the mall. And I was wondering if in Calgary things are not that extreme, and if how does it work in terms of public space and neighborhoods, parks, etc.
Yeah, we have similar consequences of the extreme weather. The shopping mall remains one of the key points of where people go and shop, but they were closed for a long time during COVID. So people are starting to experience street shopping a lot more. And I think now they kind of enjoy that a lot more. I don't have numbers to share in terms of if that have continued, just experiential. And from my part of the city where I visit often, I have seen that foot traffic and in open Main Street kind of shopping has remained high. But I also know that the shopping malls are back to normal and having the same amount of people going. So that is the main thing. And then the other one is in downtown Calgary, there is a system of elevated pathways, indoor elevated pathways created for the winter. And that has affected the neighborhoods at the street level, the commercial units at the street level. So people go in and stay inside. But those are not really public. It's not public ground. It's not public space. So it's a really problematic as well. But we have similar issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Time-wise, we're almost at the time. So does anyone have a last burning question? Otherwise, well, you will see the presenters tomorrow at the coffee break, Nicola. So is there a last question here? 3, 2, 1. No? Okay. Thank you so much for